Trump's war on drug trafficking getting even larger in scale, the president declaring cartels as unlawful combatants, paving the way.
Imagine the most feared cartel kingpin, El Mencho, being taken out not by the law, but by a rival gang inside a U.S. prison, then seeing the video go viral worldwide. On October 7, 2025, the quiet docks of San Pedro became a battlefield of helicopters, armored convoys, and federal agents, culminating in the historic arrest that finally brought the CJNG Crown Prince to justice. That raid, a decade-long hunt for El Mencho, reshaped law enforcement tactics across Mexico and the United States. But just weeks later, new footage emerged that changes the story entirely. Inside a maximum security cell, the Los Chapitos, a notorious prison gang, allegedly struck El Mencho down. The clip, seized by an anonymous source, has flooded social media, sparking debate over prison violence, cartel loyalties, and the limits of justice. What does this mean for the future of cartel control in the U.S.? Who truly holds the power in these walls? In today's video, we'll dissect the viral footage, explore the implications of Los Chapitos' rise, and reveal what this grim turn of events could signal for law enforcement and the cartel underworld. Stay tuned as we unpack every frame of this shocking new chapter. The first light of dawn had not yet brushed the horizon when the sky over San Pedro erupted into a furious blaze of searchlights and the metallic roar of helicopters. Every beam cut through the quiet night, stitching the darkness into a tapestry of stark illumination that turned the harbor into an open, unforgiving theater. Armor-coated SUVs pressed hard against the avenues, forming a steel barrier that left no alley, no corner unshrouded. Federal agents, their boots echoing off brick and concrete, marched in disciplined waves, the rhythm of their movement a silent promise that the city's calm would be shattered. This was not a random flare of law enforcement. It was the culmination of a decade-long hunt for the crown prince of the CJNG, a man whose very name had become synonymous with terror across borders. In this unfolding tableau, every flash of light, every shudder of a helicopter blade, carried the weight of a mission that had taken years of surveillance, clandestine operations, and relentless intelligence gathering to reach this pivotal moment. Operation Wipeout was a product of patient orchestration. Months of painstaking reconnaissance had mapped the underground arteries of the Rancho San Pedro gang, a street organization that had, over 5 decades, evolved from a local crew into a complex, multi-tiered entity. Beneath its surface lay a labyrinth of connections to the Mexican mafia, a prison-based syndicate that wielded a brutal code of conduct and enforced a system of taxation on every illicit venture that flowed through San Pedro's streets. The gang was divided into 6 distinct units, each controlling its own territory and functions, yet all answering to a higher authority that demanded allegiance and tribute. Notably, 2 of these units were exclusively composed of women, a fact that highlighted the depth and breadth of the organization's reach and the gendered dimensions of its power structures. These subdivisions operated like separate business entities, but they shared a common revenue stream, a hierarchical command, and an allegiance to a name that resonated far beyond the city limits. The raid itself was a meticulously choreographed assault on the gang's upper echelon. 6 buildings, clustered on a single block that had long served as the nerve center for criminal activity, were simultaneously targeted by federal and local police teams. Each knock was swift, leaving no margin for evasion. Inside, the officers found the very individuals who had been orchestrating the cartel's directives from behind bars, the so-called shot callers who decided the gang's direction, and the enforcers who carried out the violent will of the Mexican mafia. The result was the arrest of 13 key figures, each a conduit for the broader criminal enterprise. The charges that accompanied these arrests were severe federal RICO indictments aimed at dismantling the gang's operational capability and sending a stark message that the upper echelons of organized crime could no longer operate from the shadows. For the residents of San Pedro, the night's events were both a relief and a sobering reminder. The sudden absence of the gang's shadow cast a fragile calm over the community, but it also raised unsettling questions about what would fill the vacuum left behind. Law enforcement officials met with local leaders, assuring the public that while this raid was a victory, it was not the end. The city's police and federal teams pledged to continue their painstaking work of case building, dismantling remaining factions, and identifying new leaders who might rise in the wake of the operation. Their vow of relentless persistence underscored a broader narrative. The city would not tolerate such violence again, and the fight against organized crime would continue with unyielding resolve. Yet Operation Wipeout was only one chapter in the larger saga of the CJNG's expansion under El Mencho. Born in Aguilo-Matacan in 1966, El Mencho's path to power began with early drug convictions and a tumultuous deportation from the United States, experiences that forged his ruthless ambition. His rise culminated in 2009 with the founding of the CJNG, a splinter from the Millennial Cartel that rapidly evolved into a hyper-violent, technologically sophisticated, transnational organization. Under his leadership, the CJNG seized control of strategic assets such as the port of Manzano, a critical entry point for precursor chemicals arriving from China and fueling the production of methamphetamine and fentanyl. Today, the cartel's reach extends across all 32 Mexican states and spans multiple countries, forming a global network whose product portfolio reads like a catalog of death: methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and other synthetic opioids that have been directly linked to the opioid epidemic in the United States, contributing to tens of thousands of overdose deaths each year. El Mencho's operations were not limited to narcotics. His empire diversified into extortion, human trafficking, and sophisticated financial fraud schemes. Businesses and agricultural producers alike found themselves targets of the cartel's ruthless extortion rackets, while the human trafficking network operated with shocking brutality, trafficking individuals through a maze of covert routes. The financial arm of the CJNG was equally sophisticated, moving illicit proceeds through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and offshore banking structures that obscured the money trail for law enforcement eyes. What made El Mencho particularly elusive was his operational style. Unlike flamboyant cartel leaders who courted media attention, he was a ghost in the public eye. He avoided photographs, public appearances, and any hint of visibility, relying on encrypted communications and trusted couriers to orchestrate violence on a massive scale while remaining undetected. As the dust settled over San Pedro, the aftermath of the raid resonated in the everyday lives of its residents. Families peered out of their windows, their expressions a mixture of cautious optimism and lingering uncertainty.
Lots of weapons. What is this weapon here?
It's a 40-millimeter grenade launcher. This is modern warfare. We use war technologies.
They witnessed the sudden vacuum left by the gang's dismantling and wondered how the city would navigate this new reality. Law enforcement's message was clear. This raid marked a significant triumph of coordination, intelligence, and sheer force. But it also highlighted the persistent threat posed by the larger CJNG network. The city's police and federal partners continued to build on the momentum of Operation Wipeout, vowing to persist in dismantling remaining factions, exposing new leaders, and pursuing the long-term goal of restoring safety and stability to San Pedro's streets. This raid was a testament to what could be achieved when intelligence, strategy, and determined action converge, and it set a new standard for how organized crime might be confronted in the years ahead. The crack in the walls of San Pedro reverberated far beyond the city limits. Operation Wipeout had not only broken up the street gang, but it had also laid bare the skeletal structure of a network that stretched across the country and across oceans into the heart of the United States drug trade. Yet the triumph was fleeting. The CJNG, always a shadow organization, proved that a single blow could only reshape, not erase, the system. The first lesson that emerged from the raid was that the most devastating hits on a cartel come when you cut its commandeer. Removing the shot callers, the people who actually directed the day-to-day violence, throttled the gang's operational tempo. This pattern repeated itself when federal investigators seized a convoy of fentanyl in the hills surrounding a small border village, only to discover that the driver was an ex-lieutenant of the CJNG who had moved a kilogram of the lethal powder through a network of clandestine corridors. The arrest of Aliano, a seasoned smuggler, was a vivid illustration of how the cartel could pivot from one logistical route to another with alarming speed. Each time the U.S. Border Patrol or Mexican Customs found a shipment, a new path opened elsewhere, keeping the supply lines alive. This elasticity forced a rethinking of strategy. Law enforcement had to move from reactive interdiction to a proactive financial offense. The United States Congress, after observing the persistent resilience of the CJNG, pushed the Justice Department to leverage the U.S. federal law that target money laundering. The Kingpin Act, a tool born from the war on drugs but increasingly applied to violent gangs, became the centerpiece of a multi-agency push. The Act's signature move, freezing the assets of those associated with a cartel, placed a concrete dent in the CJNG's coffers. Banks and money transfers that had once been invisible to regulators were now under the microscope. A former banker, once thought of as a peripheral player, found himself on the front lines of the DOJ's crackdown. He processed millions of dollars through offshore accounts, funneling cash into the cartel's vaults that financed production, bribery, and the very violence that had scarred San Pedro. His indictment sent a clear message. The financial arteries of the CJNG could no longer stay concealed. The momentum generated by the financial clampdown was matched by a surge in international cooperation. The United States and Mexico recognized that the battle against the CJNG could not be won by isolated raids or unilateral strikes. Diplomatic channels were opened, and joint task forces began to map out the hidden pathways through the mountains. This cooperation culminated in the alliance between the CJNG and the Los Chapitos, a local faction with a deep knowledge of the terrain. Los Chapitos provided the cartel with a slice of the hard drug trade and the secret paths that led through the rugged peaks. In exchange, the CJNG supplied resources, protection, and a portion of the lucrative fentanyl and counterfeit pill market. The partnership was not merely transactional. It was a strategic gamble that underscored the cartel's opportunistic core. It reminded policymakers that attacking one line of the organization, say its finance, would not necessarily sever its entire reach. Within the walls of the federal courthouse, the DOJ amplified the financial narrative. A high-profile indictment linked the CJNG's money laundering network to U.S. financial institutions. The case against the former banker was a turning point. His testimony showed how millions of dollars flowed through offshore accounts, then re-entered the domestic economy to fund drug labs, weapons purchases, and bribes. The exposure of these channels forced a wave of transparency across the banking sector. Banks that had previously turned a blind eye to the illicit inflow of funds now faced audit and regulation, eroding the cartel's ability to fund operations at scale. Meanwhile, the conversation in Washington grew louder as the CJNG's logistical routes came under constant interdiction. The Department of Justice kept filing suits, each one tightening the net around the cartel's global partners. These suits were not merely punitive, they were instructive. They provided prosecutors with evidence that the flow of illicit funds could no longer hide in the anonymity of the global banking system. Every time a batch of counterfeit pills was seized or a kilogram of fentanyl was intercepted, a tangible reduction occurred in the supply that ultimately reached American streets. The link between border seizures and the number of overdose deaths became a measurable metric for public health officials and prosecutors alike. The focus inevitably turned toward the ultimate prize, El Mencho himself. For years, the FBI, the DEA, and Mexican intelligence had been tracking the elusive leader, but the decision of how to finally bring him down was contentious. The debate split into two factions. One advocated for a decisive action that would either eliminate the leader through targeted killings or deploy precision drone strikes. They argued that the removal of a figure like El Mencho would send a shockwave through the supply chain, cutting off the ability of the CJNG to produce counterfeit pills and fentanyl, thereby saving countless lives in the United States opioid crisis. The other camp cautioned against a unilateral drone strike that could damage diplomatic relations with Mexico, provoke civil unrest, and elevate El Mencho to martyr status. They pointed to the complex sovereignty issues involved in cross-border operations, noting that any violation of Mexican territory could unravel years of collaborative efforts. Jack Riley, a former DEA agent, voiced the concerns of the second group. He warned that a drone strike, even if highly precise, could still produce collateral damage, leading to public backlash and a narrative that would shift focus from the tactical gains to the moral cost. Riley also highlighted the importance of maintaining Mexico's cooperation. Without it, any subsequent interdiction would face significant hurdles, and the CJNG would simply adapt its operations to a more clandestine mode. On the other side, proponents of the surgical strike emphasized the immediate impact. Each kilogram of fentanyl seized meant fewer counterfeit pills on American streets, fewer overdose deaths, and a weaker market for the cartel to exploit. They argued that the slow, methodical approach of bilateral cooperation could not match the disruptive effect of a decisive strike that would cripple the cartel's supply chain, force rival factions to retreat, and create a vacuum that could be filled by law enforcement action. The diplomatic standoff between the United States and Mexico intensified.
Against drug cartels. In a memo sent to Congress, the White House saying the U.S. is now in an armed conflict with the narco gangs and labeling their members not just as criminals, but as enemy combatants.
Mexican officials, wary of violating sovereignty, issued strong warnings against unilateral drone strikes. They cited the potential for escalated tensions, loss of trust, and a breakdown in the joint operations that had been critical to recent successes. The United States, feeling the frustration of limited progress in capturing El Mencho, pressed for a more aggressive posture, arguing that the ongoing interdiction and financial pressure was not enough to halt the cartel's growth. In the halls of Washington, the agencies involved in counter-narcotics pushed a narrative that linked each seizure of fentanyl and each seizure of counterfeit medication to a direct, measurable reduction in overdose deaths. They invoked the public health crisis, noting that every kilogram of fentanyl intercepted and every counterfeit pill seized reduced the lethal supply that had been flooding communities across the nation. The argument was that a precision strike could achieve an impact that institutional reforms and collaborative interdiction could not. The stakes were high. The lives lost to an opioid epidemic had become a moral lever, compelling policymakers to consider military options even as diplomatic concerns loomed large. Against this backdrop, the DOJ's legal momentum continued. The court cases expanded beyond individual bankers to encompass entire banking networks. The indictment of the former banker was a landmark. It illustrated how a small act, processing a few $millions, could bankroll an entire network that produced thousands of pounds of illicit substances. The case sent a message that the financial infrastructure of the CJNG could no longer be insulated from U.S. scrutiny. The DOJ's relentless pursuit of these financial links served as a deterrent to any other potential financial accomplices, shrinking the cartel's ability to reinvest profits into weapons, bribery, and expansion. Within the walls of the federal courthouse, prosecutors began to build a more comprehensive picture of the CJNG's operations. Each case tied to cartel's illicit cash flows to U.S. institutions, highlighting how the cartel's global reach was facilitated by the porous nature of international finance. The indictment of the former banker was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader strategy to expose the entire financial network that supported the cartel's activities. This transparency undermined the CJNG's assumption that money could move freely through the banking system without detection. The ripple effect was felt in other countries as well. The exposure prompted foreign regulators to tighten their own oversight, creating a cascading effect that further constricted the cartel's financial freedom. The story of San Pedro and the broader CJNG operations began to be seen as a microcosm of the larger national picture. Families across both the United States and Mexico grieved for lost lives, while communities grappled with the lingering threat of a network built on fear and profit. Yet the relentless law enforcement actions, each raid, each indictment, each financial freeze, offered a glimmer of hope. They demonstrated that justice could be pursued with precision and persistence. The notion that a most powerful organization could be held accountable gained traction, encouraging further collaboration across borders. The public health crisis at the core of the cartel's demand added a layer of complexity to the equation. Every counterfeit pill seized and every kilogram of fentanyl intercepted had a direct, measurable effect on the American community suffering from the opioid epidemic. The DEA's protocols had evolved to detect counterfeit medications at border crossings, and the volume of intercepted shipments increased accordingly. This surge in interdiction, supported by the heightened cooperation between U.S. and Mexican agencies, became the backbone of the success. It showed that coordinated effort could make a tangible difference, reducing the supply of deadly substances that had once flooded streets with lethal doses. The narrative also touched on the strategic gamble inherent in the CJNG's alliance with the Los Chapitos. Los Chapitos had a long-standing presence in local territories, and their knowledge of hidden paths through the mountains proved invaluable to the cartel's production and distribution of fentanyl and other hard drugs. In exchange, the CJNG provided resources and protection, effectively turning the Los Chapitos into a necessary component of the cartel's logistics. This partnership was not without risk. A single line of attack would never sever the entire beast, and the cartel's mastery of opportunism meant that any blow to one facet of its operation could be compensated by another. The story of the alliance highlighted this reality and underscored why a single strike against a figure like El Mencho could be insufficient. When the conversation turned to the ultimate target, El Mencho, the debate reached a fever pitch. On one hand, a drone strike could deliver an immediate blow to the cartel's supply chain. On the other, it risked creating a martyr, inflaming tensions with Mexico, and jeopardizing ongoing cooperation. The Mexican officials' warnings against unilateral action were not merely political. They reflected deep concerns about sovereignty and the integrity of joint operations. Meanwhile, the United States, frustrated by the lack of progress in capturing the leader, pressed for more aggressive options, arguing that the ongoing interdiction and financial pressure was not enough to stop the cartel's growth. The DOJ strategy continued to emphasize the interconnectedness of financial and drug seizure actions. By exposing the cartel's entire financial infrastructure and applying pressure on its logistics through the Los Chapitos partnership, the DOJ aimed to create a multi-layered offensive that would weaken the cartel from within. Each indictment, each financial freeze, each interdiction, each collaboration with Mexican authorities added a layer of pressure that, collectively, could corner the cartel. The ultimate removal of a figure like El Mencho might be a symbolic act, but it could also pave the way for a broader dismantling of the cartel's operations. In the end, the story was one of relentless pursuit, complex diplomacy, strategic alliances, and a focus on public health. Each raid, each indictment, each financial freeze, and each case in the federal courthouse added a new layer of pressure on the CJNG. The alliance with Los Chapitos illustrated the cartel's opportunism and the need for multifaceted attacks. And the debate over the best way to bring down El Mencho highlighted the tension between immediate tactical gains and long-term strategic stability. The narrative captured the essence of the modern war on drugs, a relentless, evolving battle that spans borders, financial systems, and the lives of those at the front lines. The relentless pursuit of the CJNG, marked by strategic raids, incisive financial indictments, cross-border interdictions, and the complex interplay of diplomacy and public health imperatives, underscores a war on drugs that is as much about dismantling an intricate criminal economy as it is about saving lives in a nation grappling with an opioid crisis. Every kilogram of fentanyl seized, every counterfeit pill intercepted, and every financial link exposed not only weakens the cartel's supply chain, but also signals that justice can be pursued with precision, persistence, and a steadfast commitment to protecting communities on both sides of the border.